listen for is that there are many good reasons, as Professor Benjamin talked about, to change the Constitution. There's a committee, a constitutional committee, and they listed 8 important changes that need to be made. The first is legislative dysfunction and corruption, which Dr. Benjamin has talked about. 2 is the flawed electoral process. You know, we have a primary coming up on Tuesday. If you're not registered as a Democrat, you can't re-register. Your registration can't get changed until the following year. I mean, you can change it now, but you can't vote as a Democrat until the following year. There are 15 or 16 different times when you're voting in New York State. It's really a mess. There's a clean and healthy environment is the 3rd one. The 4th is educational opportunity. The 5th is civil rights protection. The 6th is social welfare. The 7th is local control. And the 8th is the court reform, which is Dr. Benjamin mentioned. So there are lots of good reasons to change the Constitution. And what Zach is going to talk about are the risks of that change. So one of the things you might think about is content versus process. Because the content, there's lots of content and good reasons to change. But what are the risks in the process? And that's what Zach is going to be talking about.
Okay, great. All right, so in general, the debate is largely aspirational versus functional. Now, there are a lot of groups that actually agree on all of the things that need to change. The difference is how you get there. So I'm going to predicate my talk by saying that I'm someone who I spend a lot of time running elections. So I look at it as a functional, how do you run elections? How do you elect those 204 delegates? And I'll talk more about that later. So a lot of the arguments against the convention have to do with how you actually elect delegates, and there are alternatives that we will discuss of how to get those changes you want. Now, okay, there we are. All right, basics, we already talked about most of this. The last bullet here, the referendum will appear on the back of your ballot in November. So if you walk into the voting booth and you want to vote and you don't see it, make sure you turn it over. This is one item that I find problematic because I was trained as an election inspector a while ago. I think 2010 was the last time. And when I was trained, I was told that a lot of the older machines only scan one side of the ballot. So hopefully they replaced all of those old machines since then. Otherwise, even counting the results is going to be problematic. Now, we already talked a lot about this. How do you actually change the Constitutional Convention? You can change it by legislation. You can change it by convention. Both ways, whatever the change is, has to come back to you, the voters, as a ballot referendum. The difference being, with the legislation, the referendum has to be specifically on the one point that was changed in the legislation. So you get one ballot item, one change. What you do in convention, you have no clue how it's going to be presented. In 1967, it was one big take it or leave it thing, and people talk a lot about the good things that were in the 1967 convention that should have passed, but then they ignore a lot of the bills that were also in there. There were good provisions on education, for example, where they're moving towards free college, for example. There are also provisions that would allow you to take money away from public schools. You don't really want to sacrifice your children's education in your public schools in order to get more money for college, right? The electoral process. There was an amendment to look at doing nonpartisan redistricting. That sounds good, but there was also an amendment that said that you could redistrict one of the houses without regard to the population of those districts, which is completely, talk about eliminating representative democracy there. So, let's see. If you vote yes, you have to start going to elections. You elect 204 delegates, 3 for each Senate district, 15 at-large statewide. This is sort of the timeline. In spring 2018, the legislature actually gets the opportunity to set rules. Given the state of the legislature, maybe they won't change them, who knows. But then they get elected the same way that state senators get elected. They petition, they go through primaries, they go through the elections, and they're elected in November. And then the following, yes. Sorry. All right.
And can you bring it back? Here, you know what? So move it over a little bit.
All right, great. All right. Okay, and then after you elect the delegates, in April 2019, the delegates convene for a session that is supposed to be 6 months in length. However, there's no real limitation. The convention can do whatever they want once they get there. And but if they do go through just a one session, it ends in September. In November 2019, you get to vote on whether or not you want it. Again, you have no clue how it's going to appear on the ballot. So here are some of the arguments, very briefly, why you should vote no. One, amendments are routinely passed by the legislature. Yes, the legislature is a problem. I will talk about how you can get around that a little bit later. The Constitution has been amended 225 times already. And the process, the legislature passes it twice by a simple majority vote. The governor has no option of vetoing, and then it goes on the ballot as referendum, and you get to vote yes or no on the one item amendment. Here's my major issue because I run campaigns. People talk about a people's convention, that's the aspirational issue. It's unlikely that you're going to have a real people's convention in the era where campaigns are dictated by money. Citizens United, tons of dark money. And the statistics are 90 to 95% of elections are won by the person who has more money. And who's going to have the money? It's not us. It's going to be this guy. So on Friday, I was on the radio over in Senator Seward's district, so I was looking up some statistics on who donates to him. The top 10 donors are, corporations, PACs, lobbyists. It's not people. I live in Senator Amador's district, 46. That's even worse. Over the course of his political career, Senator Amador has received 4 times as much money from one political committee as from every single individual voter combined. So if you're talking about trying to run 204 delegate races, it's not going to be the people in the People's Convention who are buying the races. Now, and I already talked about these statistics, but there is a way the way you actually get changes, the way you get amendments is by electing state senators, basically. A lot of the issues that we've been talking about that we want to change, the processes, the voting issues, these things are already bills that mostly have already passed the Assembly time after time after time, and the Senate kills them. So if you're interested in constitutional amendments, you have to ask yourself, is it going to be easier to elect half a dozen state senators or run 204 delegate campaigns? And even though I'm talking about this issue of dark money being a huge problem in elections, we can't actually win these races. So I worked on Christine Pellegrino's campaign down in Assembly District 9, Long Island, a race that had never been won by a Democrat. We had like a 13-point disadvantage on voter enrollment. She won by 18 points because you had people going door to door, you had people running elections, having conversations with every single voter in the district. Now, that's how you win races. If you have enough people, you can overcome the ungodly amounts of money that we poured into these races. The problem is that in 2018, you're going to have governor's race, 27 congressional races, 150 assembly races, 63 Senate races, and 204 delegate races if this passes. Now, no one can run 204 races and have enough volunteers to knock on every door. But you can run maybe 10 Senate races and have enough volunteers to win that race regardless of the amount of money they pour into it. So if you want a constitutional amendment, the way you get it and the way you sustainably change the system you're looking at is you choose target state Senate districts. Now, everyone is gaga over congressional races, right? Well, a lot of those state Senate districts that are vulnerable, they overlap with the congressional races, with the congressional districts. So if you want to actually get changes, you need to focus your energy and select a small number of races. And it's a lot easier to win. It's a lot easier to win 6 or 12 elections than 204. So that's my functional analysis of elections. And so we already talked a lot about some of these. The things that people are concerned they'll lose, environmental protections and other, the forever wild and other environmental protections. We talked about collective bargaining and pensions. Now, a lot of people argue this won't come up, nobody will touch this, but the reality is that New York already has, even for private unions, New York already has pretty good protections as states go. But what we've seen in the Albany area where I live, we've had 2 big strikes recently, or lockouts, and even people who have already retired are losing their health care benefits that were guaranteed by their pensions, right? So we know what is happening in New York when you don't have constitutional protections to unions. We've seen, in Albany, we've seen it just in the last year, what's happening to these pensions. And so this is something that there is going to be a lot of money poured into the delegate elections to target. And then this idea of home rule, there are a lot of groups and special interests that are already targeting home rule, Reclaim New York among them. Home rule is basically your right to self-govern in your communities, your right to control things by zoning, planning, you get to choose your own qualifications for elected officials and such. A lot of that is under assault, and that is, over the last few years, you think about some of the prominent issues and the types of companies that have been working on weakening this. You think about pipelines. They're trying to get basically government eminent domain rights to put through pipelines, regardless of what the town says. I used to teach down at Farmington University back when fracking was a big issue. And the reason that the courts upheld the municipalities' choices to ban or delay things was because we have strong home rule protection. And there are millions and millions of dollars sitting there in funds already waiting to attack home rule provisions, specifically for these types of companies. Constitution protects free public education. Again, back in 1967, there were provisions, even way back then, that would allow you to take money away from public schools. And then protection for public and social welfare programs. The last successful convention was back during the Great Depression, so you can imagine a lot of these public and social programs were very important back then at the last successful convention. Maybe we don't have as much focus on them today, and that is one that I haven't seen a lot of organizations lining up to attack yet, but it is one of those things that are on the radar. So, all in all, please vote no on the Constitutional Convention referendum, and here's a list of just a few template logos of organizations that are asking you to vote no. So, all right.